most respectfully invite the Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, to deliver the welcome address and also present the introduction of our guest speaker, Mr. Ashraf Mehmood Wathra.
Governor Wathra, Acting High Commissioner, members of the Monetary Board, Deputy Governors, senior members of the Central Bank Management, bank CEOs, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This is clearly a happy and auspicious occasion in that we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of the founding of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And indeed, we are very privileged that Governor Wathra, who until 3-4 months ago was the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, has agreed to deliver this occasion to mark the 67th anniversary. I met Governor Wathra, I think, just about a year ago in Islamabad at one of the SAARC Finance governors meetings, and then had the privilege of meeting him a couple of times within that forum. And listening to him on those occasions, I thought it would be extremely useful for him to come to Sri Lanka to share the experience he had gone through during his tenure as the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. Because it was uncanny as to the challenges he had to navigate. The resonance between what Pakistan had to do and what we are in the process of doing was quite striking. However, it took me about 7 or 8 months to get my act together to be able to invite Governor Wathra to Colombo, and it was particularly felicitous that his diary enabled him to come to be with us to deliver this oration. Governor Wathra's term coincided almost exactly with the period Pakistan implemented an IMF extended fund facility program. And the prior conditions that Pakistan faced were uncannily similar to the conditions that prevailed in this country in February, March of 2016. The challenges were almost identical. But what Pakistan was able to do was really to implement a very impressive reform program, both in terms of macroeconomic stabilization, as well as some structural reforms in the monetary and financial sectors. The discipline they exhibited through that period was exemplary, and I think when you listen to the governor, you will see the path ahead for us as well. We are right in the middle of our EFF at the moment, and I think the governor's remarks will throw considerable light on how best we can gear ourselves up to completing this program successfully. I should say a little bit about Governor Wathra himself. As I said, he served as the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan from April 2014 to April 2017. And in his capacity of the governor, he was, of course, chairman of the State Bank of Pakistan's Board of Directors, as well as the chairman of the Monetary Policy Committee. And at international fora, he was the governor, Pakistan's governor at the IMF, the Asian Clearing Union. He was co-chair of the Financial Stability Board, the Regional Consultative Group for Asia. And he held a number of important positions within Pakistan in terms of serving on several significant policy-making bodies in that country. And Governor Wathra's performance as the person who was primarily responsible for stewardship of the State Bank of Pakistan during this implementation of the EFF was a large cause for him being selected as Euromoney's Central Bank Governor of the Year in 2016. As you know, Euromoney is an extremely prestigious financial publication, and Governor Wathra had the prestigious honor of being selected the Governor of the Year last year. And prior to joining the State Bank of Pakistan, Governor Wathra had a very successful career in investment banking and had lots of experience in sovereign lending, and he's no stranger to Sri Lanka. He's been here many times and knows Sri Lanka very well. And in fact, in my conversations with him, I have learnt interesting insights about Sri Lanka, drawing on the experience he has had in this country. So with that, let me welcome Governor Wathra and invite him to deliver the oration to mark the 67th anniversary of the founding of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Governor Wathra.
Honorable Dr. Governor Indrajit Kumaraswamy, members of the Monetary Board, senior management of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, former central bankers, secretaries to ministries, diplomats, university academics, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is always a great pleasure to be at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and indeed an honor to be invited to deliver the 67th anniversary oration. I wish to start out by thanking Governor Kumaraswamy and the organizers of this conference for their kind invitation. And Dr. Indrajit, I'm very grateful for a very generous introduction and a very warm welcome in your comments just delivered, and the very warm hospitality extended to me since I got in here last evening. And also my congratulations to the Central Bank staff on the anniversary of Central Bank Sri Lanka. Before I start, a couple of clarifications. Our founding fathers of Pakistan named the central bank as State Bank of Pakistan. So in my comments, I'll be using State Bank, SBP, or Central Bank Pakistan, which is the same entity, not three different entities. Also, our financial year starts 1st of July and ends June 30th. So if you hear me talking about year 2017 in past tense, don't worry too much. In terms of financial year, our 2017 is past tense. This is a bit like, it can be confusing otherwise. And also, let me say that I have tried to encapsulate 12 IMF reviews over 3 years of EFF into 35 minutes. And these 35 minutes, you will benefit only if you concentrate. So today I will share with this enlightened gathering the details of Pakistan's recent experience with the IMF, highlighting its role in the country's macroeconomic stabilization and structural reforms. I'll begin by briefly describing the initial conditions which made it imperative for the economy to seek the fund's assistance. Next, I will outline the three-pronged focus of the extended fund facility program that we availed, namely stabilization, macroeconomic resilience, and structural reforms. Then we will review some specific measures taken within these focus areas and their impact. For a holistic perspective, I'll also touch upon factors exogenous to the IMF program which supported the economy's turnaround. I would also be suggesting the way forward for Pakistan and what the future may have in store for the country's partnership with the IMF. Finally, I'll draw some parallels between Pakistan's EFF program and the one currently underway in Sri Lanka, since our experience may be quite illuminating for domestic policymakers here. Now that we have set out the agenda for this talk, let me begin by posing a question to you. Let's say we took a snap poll of policymakers present here today to identify the single most important goal for their economies. What might the results look like? Personally, I reckon that achieving sustainable, inclusive growth would rank atop the list of priorities. For emerging economies like Pakistan, however, this can be akin to walking a tightrope at times. A conservative approach to growth, such as one built around contained government spending and tight monetary policy, may be easier to sustain, but may come at the expense of slower progress and on social indicators and welfare of the general public. In contrast, a more bullish approach to growth, spurred by easy monetary policy and generous and targeted government spending on portfolios like education, health, and infrastructure, may boost progress on social indicators in the short run. However, if it involves compromising on financial soundness, any progress made is likely to fizzle out in a typical boom-bust cycle that would eventually bring the economy back to square one. Pakistan is no stranger to this delicate balancing act. In 2013, the country found itself on the brink of an economic crisis amid persistent energy deficiencies, declining development expenditures, rising inflation, and meager foreign exchange reserves. Specifically, the central bank's foreign exchange reserves touched a low of $3 billion in November 2013, and net international reserve were negative $2.5 billion. It was around this point that the country entered into a 3-year EFF arrangement with the IMF. The task ahead was formidable. In addition to addressing the immediate and precarious balance of payments position, there was also a need to adopt smart policies which could enhance the economy's resilience, restore investor confidence, tap into the country's latent economic potential, and add to the general well-being of Pakistanis. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to report that we were up to the task. And incidentally, this is the first time that Pakistan ever completed a IMF program. Otherwise, we used to be known as two-tranche countries. Thanks to the homegrown program of reforms supported by the IMF, the country rebounded strongly with marked improvement in public finances, rebuilding of external buffers, and gradually strengthening the economic growth. In particular, the IMF program had three major goals: to ensure stabilization, enhance macroeconomic resilience, and address structural constraints. About the same goals are set for Sri Lanka's program. Firstly, in terms of stabilization, the most direct form of IMF assistance was financial. The three-year extended fund facility arrangement amounted to approximately $6.4 billion, with disbursements in tranches of equal amounts of approximately $550 million. The EFF also featured a long repayment period beginning 4.5 years from the date of signing the program and extending 10 years from the date of disbursement. This financial assistance was vital in shoring up the country's foreign exchange reserves. The State Bank of Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves duly recovered from a low of $3 billion in November 2013 to a high of $19.5 billion by mid-October 2016. Association with the IMF also helped Pakistan mobilize funds from other IFIs and donors, giving further impetus to the reserve buildup. Incidentally, the country also benefited from a tremendous growth in worker remittances during this three-year period, courtesy of elevated infrastructure spending in GCC countries up until financial year 15, as well as continuing efforts by the Pakistan Remittance Initiative to facilitate fast, cheap, and convenient flow of funds. Compared to an inflow of $13.9 billion in financial year 2013, worker remittances averaged $18.2 billion per year during financial year 14 to financial year 16. Now we all experience some weaknesses in remittances, including Sri Lanka. In addition to this, fiscal consolidation was repeatedly emphasized throughout the program. This consolidation was achieved by enhancing revenue generation on one hand and implementing expenditure controls on the other. While long-term reforms were initiated in the power sector to contain losses and the resultant fiscal burden, which I'll explain later in detail, quick measures were taken to bring the volume of the deficit down to manageable levels. Subsidies were cut down drastically, and payment arrears were addressed. Now, these developments were instrumental in reducing the economy's vulnerabilities and consolidated its resilience among internal and external shocks. By the end of the IMF program, Pakistan had sufficient amount of reserves to finance almost 7 months of merchandise imports. Moreover, the fiscal deficit declined from a mammoth 8.2% of GDP in financial year 13 to a more contained 5.1% of GDP during financial year 14 to financial year 2016. This helped improve the sustainability profile of public debt. Certainly, this resilience provided us some space to maneuver in the direction of high growth. Thirdly, with a view to addressing structural constraints, a number of reforms were introduced over the course of the program. I'll first touch upon measures that were meant to enhance the effectiveness of monetary policy. The key reform measure here was the enactment of amendments to State Bank of Pakistan Act to enhance the central bank's autonomy. I guess I do not really need to overemphasize the importance of central bank independence in front of this audience, which includes many eminent central bankers. But I would certainly take pride in highlighting the fact that Pakistan has been the first country in South Asia to have established an independent monetary policy committee in substance, because it's backed with a law, which I'll hereafter refer to as MPC. Today, there is absolutely no representation of the federal government in the MPC. It instead comprises 3 State Bank of Pakistan board members, 3 senior executives of the central banks, and 3 external members who are professional economists, with the State Bank of Pakistan governor serving as the chairman. In addition, the publication of MPC meeting minutes is a welcome measure that brings further transparency in monetary policy decision-making. Moreover, the transmission of policy changes to market interest rates is being facilitated by improvements in the State Bank of Pakistan's interest rate corridor. The financial sector was another area where a number of important reforms were introduced in order to improve the access and depth of financial services. Key measures included A, the enactment of Credit Bureau Act to help financial institutions extend credit to neglected segments of society. This does not mean that no credit bureaus existed in Pakistan before that. Their existence was formalized and given better coverage in law. B, amendments to the Financial Institutions Recovery of Finances Ordinance to improve recovery and resolution of NPLs and support the provision of credit. And C, promulgation of the Deposit Protection Corporation Act to pave the way for protection of small depositors in case a financial institution failed. Before that, we had a different system, which we no need to spend time on that anymore. More broadly, State Bank of Pakistan continued to champion the cause of financial inclusion, taking its cue from the National Financial Inclusion Strategy that was developed in collaboration with key stakeholders and formally launched in May 2015. The strategy lays out the vision, framework, action plan, and target outcomes with the overarching aim of enhancing formal financial access to 50% of the adult population by year 2020. At the same time, the central bank remained mindful that expanding access alone will not be sufficient. Safeguards are needed to ensure financial system soundness, along with an active preventive mechanism against any illicit use of the banking system. Thus, SBP strengthened the framework for supervision of financial conglomerates and the contingency planning framework for systemically important banks. Amendments to the Anti-Money Laundering Act were introduced to support efforts to combat terrorism financing and serious tax crimes. In addition, the central bank also instituted a phased implementation of Basel III capital and liquidity requirements to strengthen the regulatory and supervisory framework. Particular attention was paid to the capital adequacy of the banks with a view towards improving asset quality and enhancing the banking sector's resilience. Taken together, a number of reforms were made to increase the financial sector soundness and resilience against any domestic or external shocks, and guard against bank runs and any ensuing financial crisis. Finally, the fiscal sector also benefited from a host of reforms. Most notable were the amendments made in the Fiscal Responsibility and Debt Limitation Act to enhance fiscal prudence. These included A, limiting the federal fiscal deficit, excluding foreign grants, to a 4% of GDP for 3 years from financial year 2017-18 onwards, and maintaining it at a maximum of 3.5% of GDP thereafter. I think Sri Lanka is working on something very similar. And B, phased reductions to ultimately bring down total public debt to 50% of GDP over a 15-year horizon. Furthermore, other reforms in the fiscal domain included changes in revenue administration to broaden the tax base, enactment of gas infrastructure development cess to support the government's revenue generation efforts, drafting of legislation governing benami transactions or proxy transactions with the objective of improving tax compliance and enforcement, and reforms in power sector to reduce energy subsidies and accumulation of arrears. Revenue collection efforts also received a boost from the removal of Federal Board of Revenue's powers to grant exemptions through statutory regulatory orders, or commonly known as SROs. This was executive function with the Federal Board of Revenue, which has been withdrawn. And this is in contrast to Sri Lanka, where the program is proposing more delegation to revenue authorities. Collectively, these reforms were instrumental in fostering the economy's turnaround, and since the commencement of IMF program in September 2013. With the buildup of foreign exchange reserves and fiscal consolidation, fostering macroeconomic stabilization and resilience. As mentioned earlier, the next logical step was to nudge GDP growth. And the structural reforms helped generate this impetus. Moreover, prudent monetary management coupled with a fortuitous decline in international commodity prices laid the foundation for low and stable inflation. From double-digit headline CPI inflation seen during financial year 08 to financial year 2012, year-on-year inflation fell to a decade low of 1.3% in September 2015 and averaged 4.2% in financial year 2017, well within the central bank's 6% target for the year. Low inflation, in turn, provided State Bank of Pakistan room to pursue an easing monetary policy stance. Starting from November 2014, the policy rate was reduced to a historic low. In fact, this is 48 years low, at 5.75% in May 2016. This rate has since been maintained for well over a year now, setting the stage for a notable decline in the cost of borrowings for the private sector. Specifically, the weighted average lending rate fell from 11.2% in 2013 to only 7.3% in 2017. The availability of low-cost funding, together with the government's efforts to, among other things, alleviate the energy shortage and improve the business climate, triggered a welcome increase in credit to private sector. Compared to a net retirement of rupees 19 billion in financial year 13, the flow of credit was in excess of rupees 450 billion on average during financial year 14 to 17. The year 2017 was especially encouraging as the flow of private sector credit reached a decade high of rupees 748 billion. Moreover, within these loans to private businesses, a substantial amount of rupees 251 billion, to be precise, represented long-term loans availed for fixed investment purposes, which is an encouraging omen for the country's future growth prospects. As it is, the IMF program helped put the economy back onto an upward growth trajectory. Real GDP growth picked up from a mere 2.8% on average during financial years 2009 to financial year 2013 to a much healthier 4.5% during financial years 14 to 17. In fact, real GDP growth of 5.3% for 2017 represents the highest growth in Pakistan economy during the last 10 years. You may be tempted to think, so far, so good, right? For me, though, two key questions regarding the economy's growth remain. Firstly, is it enough? And secondly, is it sustainable? Regarding the first question, the recent GDP growth certainly looks reasonable compared to the 4.6% growth average that other emerging markets and developing economies are expected to achieve next year. However, we should view this as a step towards achieving an even higher growth rate in the medium term, which is compatible with our potential and is also synchronized with the demographic transition the country is going through. When it comes to potential, Pakistan has the 6th largest population in the world, but only the 24th largest economy. These two numbers alone tell of big opportunities that lie in front of us. But these also signify those constraints that did not allow us to grow enough to uplift living standards of our people. From demographic perspective, we need a consistent growth rate of over 7% to be able to engage the 1.7 million youth entering the labor force every year. Otherwise, unemployment in the country will increase. But the problem is that Pakistan has a history of sacrificing economic growth for short-term macroeconomic stabilization, and hence the second question regarding sustainability. Structural weaknesses of the economy do not allow high growth rates to be sustained via demand generation. The two Achilles heels of Pakistan's macroeconomic management, the low tax to GDP ratio and foreign exchange deficit, have time and again challenged the budding growth momentums, forcing the economy to recede only after a few strides. Even now, the most recent growth uptick has come with strings attached, namely a significant increase in capital and raw material imports. What this implies is that we need to achieve a high growth rate without taking balance of payments deficit to unmanageable levels, and also without putting too much burden on the government. This means that a sustainable growth model for Pakistan would be one that is built on the pillars of entrepreneurship and innovation in the private sector. By suggesting this, we are not downplaying the role of the government. It is going to stay important, but it should only be limited to maintenance of macroeconomic stability, facilitating markets with informed policy and competent regulation, implementation of good governance, provision of law and order, enforcement of contracts, quick and fair dispensation of justice, provision of basic social services, provision of safety nets for the poor and vulnerable, and regulation of markets. Meanwhile, the private sector is the only sustainable engine of inclusive growth in Pakistan, which has the potential of generating employment, contributing public revenue, and providing affordable goods and services without compromising on macroeconomic stability. And to really unleash the full potential of private sector, I would emphasize again the need for more structural reforms. These could address aspects as diverse as ease of starting a business, getting electricity, paying taxes, protecting minority investors, enforcing contracts, some of which are indicated by the World Bank Doing Business project as weaker areas in terms of Pakistan's regulatory landscape. Moreover, continuity in the reforms process is crucial to ensure that the country continues to build on the tangible gains made so far. It also has an intangible signaling value. Any investor worth his or her salt will only fully commit to ambitious new ventures when he or she is convinced that the government has a long-term vision and that it will diligently follow through on its declared reforms agenda. Mere lip service or half-hearted implementation will not inspire sustained private investment. The IMF is naturally well aware of these dynamics, and hence the prominent place and sometimes quite forceful emphasis is accorded to reforms in its programs. In fact, on this note, I'm inclined to give a special mention to the IMF's expert staff, which provided us with tactical assistance throughout the EFF program. To ensure that the country remained on track, the program was monitored on a quarterly basis through a combination of prior actions, quantitative performance criteria, structural benchmarks, and indicative targets. While agreeing on the country's performance against the set criteria was admittedly challenging at times, entailing long hours of tough discussions and negotiations between domestic policy makers and the fund staff. This constant vigilance helped instill an unwavering commitment to the reform process. Importantly, there was one point on which both partners readily agreed at the program's conclusion. It had proven to be a broad-ranging success. Now, given the critical support extended by the IMF to Pakistan's economy over the years, one might expect the Pakistani citizens, who were the ultimate beneficiaries of this support, to have a favorable view of the fund. However, this is not the case. And popular opinion about IMF within Pakistan remains divided. In particular, the conditionalities that come attached with the fund's programs tend to be seen through lenses of distrust. While policymakers, particularly those of an economic bent, recognize that such conditions are essential to safeguard IMF's interests as a lender of the last resort. This concept is not easily absorbed by the common man. In a few extreme cases, the conditionalities may even be viewed as restrictions that impede on countries' sovereignty and are allegedly motivated by geopolitical rather than economic considerations. These perceptions need to be actively managed. It is important to communicate that an IMF program with a country is often analogous to a doctor-patient relationship. Just like a doctor may prescribe a particularly bitter medicine to a sick patient, or even recommend a painful surgery as a last resort, so too can the IMF prescribe a stringent series of reforms to rescue an economy from a severe crisis and put it back on the road to a sustained recovery. Naturally, it doesn't make sense for the patient or a country's citizens to resent the entity issuing the well-intended prescriptions. That said, I belong firmly in the camp that values the IMF's numerous contributions to stability of international monetary system in general, and its support to Pakistan during crunch times in particular. The country's partnership with the IMF extends over 66 years, and it has derived much benefit from the policy dialogue and capacity building programs rolled out in concert with the fund. Pakistan will continue to build upon the structural reforms introduced during the IMF program at home and on a broader level, strive to play an increasingly involved role in realizing our shared vision of cooperation and prosperity for the global community of nations. As for Sri Lanka, the parallels between the ongoing EFF program and the one concluded in Pakistan are quite evident, with overlapping features, including provision of balance of payment support, reduction in fiscal deficit, and planned improvements for the investment environment. Encouragingly, Sri Lanka's performance thus far has been broadly satisfactory, as per the second review of EFF earlier in July. From what I gather, Sri Lankan authorities are keen to incorporate greater exchange rate flexibility with an aim to counter external sector vulnerabilities, and this appears to be the correct orientation, especially keeping in mind the country's positioning as an increasingly export-led economy. I sincerely hope that my talk today contained valuable insights for the Sri Lankan policymakers and wish them all the success with their IMF program. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for your attention, and once again, I'm grateful to Governor Kumaraswamy and the organizers of this event for inviting me over.
Thank you. To deliver the vote of thanks, we most respectfully invite Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
Good afternoon, Governor Wathra, the keynote speaker and the chief guest today afternoon. Governor Kumaraswamy, and High Commissioner of Pakistan, Your Excellency, and the members of the Monetary Board, Deputy Governors, the ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues at the Central Bank. So indeed, I have pleasant task of delivering the vote of thanks in this important occasion. I think the Governor, we can't find any other most suitable person for this occasion, especially Central Bank's 67th oration, and especially given the experience and the kind of cycles, business cycles that we experience in two countries and also central banks. I think it's indeed a great pleasure to listen, and also I would like to thank on behalf of the Central Bank for generously sharing your experiences in your tenure at the Central Bank of Pakistan, State Bank of Pakistan. I can recall the first time, in fact, when I met the governor somewhere back in 2014 on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meetings. Governor Wathra has always been a very good supporter, great supporter of central bank operations. At several SAC finance meetings, I can remember Governor Wathra, and obviously at that time, Governor Raghuram Raj, and also a member of this SAC finance, where Governor made significant contributions in the cooperation of central banking. And also, when we listen to the Governor Wathra's experience, we can see a lot of parallels, and the experience very similar, very relevant. Especially people like us at the central bank and also the government who have experienced negotiating with the IMF several programs, successes, failures, a lot of all these areas. I think when you listen, then we can we learn a lot of experience of how we can move forward, and also in the end, the challenges that you mentioned is very important, both for Pakistan and Sri Lanka in terms of making further progress. So let me again appreciate and thank very much, Governor, for accepting our invitation and coming here and making this important contribution. And also I'd like to thank our Governor Kumaraswamy for initiating, I think it's Governor's idea that we should invite Governor Wathra at some point, and because it was discussed some time ago, but we were finally able to get him down here at this important occasion. So thank you, Governor, as well, and also other members of the Monetary Board, our colleagues here, Deputy Governors, and also the people who come here from the Ministry of Finance, senior officers, and from the financial community, CEOs, chairmen of commercial banks, and other financial institutions, and also from the Ministry of Policy Planning, our public sector ministries, and other people who are coming here and listening to this, and also I think we have invited for the media as well. So on behalf of Central Bank, let me thank everyone, and we hope, I think it's again, it's very useful experience that we all learned. Thank you, Governor Wathra.